Matter of spinal cord. But before going towards the grey matter, we will briefly discuss what grey matter is and what white matter is. For that, we will go to the neuron. This is a typical multipolar neuron which has a cell body, dendrites attached to it, and an axon. So we will divide the axon from the cell body downwards. We will make cell body a different entity and the axon a different entity. Now, if there is a collection of cell bodies of neurons somewhere, for example, this is a collection of cell bodies. These individual dots are showing cell bodies of these neurons. This thing. It is called a ganglion if it is lying outside the central nervous system. By central nervous system, I mean the brain and the spinal cord. But if this collection is inside the central nervous system, it is called a nucleus. So first, we need to know what a ganglion and what a nucleus is. So the collection of cell bodies of neuron outside the CNS is called a ganglion, and if the same collection is inside the CNS, that is the brain and the spinal cord, it is called a nucleus. Now, if multiple nuclei combine, each nucleus having its own specific function, it is called a grey matter. For example, this is a spinal cord. We already know that the inner, if we take a cross section of the spinal cord, this is a cross section of spinal cord. If we take the cross section of spinal cord, we will see an H-shaped or butterfly-shaped grey matter inside the CNS, inside the spinal cord, and outside is the white matter. Now, what is this grey matter composed of? This grey matter is not randomly spread cell bodies of neurons. It has multiple collections of cell bodies of neurons, each having its own specific function, and these are called nuclei. These are the nuclei of the grey matter of spinal cord. When multiple nuclei combine, they form the grey matter. So, what is a nucleus? Nucleus is the collection of neuronal cell bodies inside the CNS, and when multiple nuclei combine, they form the grey matter. Same is the case if these collections are inside the brain, they form grey matter there, and if these collections of nuclei inside the spinal cord, they form the grey matter in the spinal cord. Now, coming to these axons, if these axons, obviously these are the cell bodies of neurons, and they will have axons. If these axons go out of the grey matter and they collect inside the CNS, this structure is called a tract. So the collection of axons inside the CNS is called a tract, and if these axons leave the spinal cord or leave the central nervous system, they become a bundle of axons outside the CNS, and this is called a nerve. So the collection of axons inside the central nervous system is called a tract, and the combination of tracts, so when a lot of tracts combine, they form white matter. So this is called white matter. And if the same axons, they leave the central nervous system, that is, this leave the spinal cord or the brain, they become the nerve. So this is a nerve. So this was about what a grey matter is and what white matter is. Now we will continue and we will look what kind of nuclei are present in the spinal cord and what are their functions. Cross section of the spinal cord. This is a typical cross section of spinal cord showing an oval shaped structure. This is the anterior part and this is the posterior part. It shows a posterior median sulcus and an anterior median fissure. There is an H-shaped or butterfly-shaped grey matter inside the spinal cord, and on the peripheries of this grey matter is all the white matter. These parts are the white matter. And to the spinal cord are attached the spinal nerves on both sides. This is a picture of a typical spinal nerve which I have drawn only on one side. It is attached to the spinal cord by two roots. There is an anterior root and a posterior root. The anterior root is motor, it carries motor fibers. By fibers I mean axons. And the posterior root is formed by sensory fibers or sensory axons. When these two roots combine, they form a typical spinal nerve, the trunk of the spinal nerve, which has mixed fibers. It has both motor and sensory fibers. As soon as the spinal nerve trunk is formed, it divides into anterior and posterior primary branches or the primary rami. Obviously, the branches, the primary rami will be also mixed. They have sensory and motor fibers. The main trunk of the spinal nerve is also mixed, having both sensory and motor fibers, but the anterior and posterior root, in the anterior and posterior root, the axons are segregated, the motor enter the anterior root and the sensory are in the posterior root. Now our topic is the grey matter, so we will stick only to the grey matter. This is the grey matter of the spinal cord, and for the purpose of description, we will divide the grey matter into three parts. by two imaginary lines. This is the anterior horn of the spinal cord. This anterior horn is motor, that means it has the nuclei which perform motor function. This is the posterior horn of spinal cord and it has sensory nuclei. That means they receive the sensory stimuli from different parts of body. And this is the intermediate zone between the anterior and posterior horns. Now we will discuss the nuclei of the anterior horn first, which are the motor nuclei. There are three groups of nuclei in the anterior horn. I will draw it. Now these are not three nuclei, there are three groups of nuclei. One is the medial group, one is the lateral group, and one is the intermediate or the central group. The medial group of nuclei, there are many nuclei in the medial group. The medial group of nuclei supply the muscles of the trunk. That is from the neck to the pelvis, they supply the muscles of trunk. I am just randomly drawing multiple nuclei. So these are the nuclei which supply the muscles of the trunk. So as the spinal cord passes through all of the trunk, that's why this medial group will be found in all parts of the spinal cord. From wherever you cut, wherever you take a cross section, you will find the medial group of nuclei present in it. Then coming to the lateral group. The lateral group of nuclei contains the nuclei which supply the limbs, the upper limb and the lower limb. So as you know already that the upper limb is supplied by the brachial plexus, and the brachial plexus starts from the spinal segment C5 and ends at the spinal segment T1. C5, 6, 7, 8 and T1. So the lateral group of nuclei will be seen in cross sections of spinal cord, which we take from the level C5, C6, C7, C8 and T1, because the brachial plexus is lying there. Then coming down the cord, when this lumbosacral plexus starts and it supplies the lower limb, which starts from L1 and reaches up to S3. So these lateral group of nuclei will again be seen from L1, L2, L3, L4, L5 and then S1, 2, 3. These are the segments of spinal cord which show the lateral group of nuclei because they are going to supply the limbs. If we cut it from any other part of the spinal cord, you won't see this lateral nucleus. Then coming to the central group of nuclei. The central group of nuclei is also present in only in two parts of the spinal cord. One is the cervical part and the other is the lumbosacral part. First we will talk about the lumbosacral part. In the lumbosacral part you find a large lumbosacral nucleus. The function of this lumbosacral nucleus is unknown and the exact location is also unknown. So we will just ignore it and move towards the upper part, in which we will reach the spinal segment, the cervical segment. In the cervical segment you see two nuclei in the central group. One is the accessory nucleus and one is the phrenic nucleus. The phrenic nucleus gives off the phrenic nerve, and as you know the phrenic nerve has the root value of C3, 4, 5. So this phrenic nucleus will be found in the spinal cord segment C3, C4 and C5. But the accessory nucleus, which gives off the spinal root of accessory nerve is the 11th cranial nerve. It has two roots, a cranial root and a spinal root. So the spinal root of accessory nerve come from the these accessory nuclei which are lying in the level C1, 2, 3, 4 and C5 and C6. So the central group of nuclei is found in two parts. One is the lumbosacral region, where it has a lumbosacral nucleus which the function of which is unknown, but in the cervical region it has two nuclei. One is the phrenic nucleus which lies at the level of C3, C4, C5, and the other is the phrenic nucleus C3, 4, 5 and the accessory nucleus which is found in C1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 segments. That means if you cut the cord at C5, C6 or C3 or C4, you will see the accessory nucleus. But if you cut the cord at C2, you won't find the phrenic nucleus because it starts at level of C3. Now this was all about the anterior horn. Now coming to the posterior horn. The posterior horn has nuclei which receive the sensory stimuli. It has multiple nuclei. One of them is called the substantia gelatinosa, which lies at the margin of the posterior horn. This substantia gelatinosa receives stimuli of pain, temperature and touch. So this is substantia gelatinosa and it receives stimuli of pain, temperature and touch. Then comes a large nucleus which is called the nucleus proprius. So this nucleus properties is also related somewhat to the touch, pain and temperature sensations. So both these nuclei almost share the same functions. Then comes the nucleus which is called the Clark's nucleus, and this Clark's nucleus receives information of proprioception. The proprioception is basically the sensation of position of your body parts. So this nucleus, the Clark's nucleus, receives the sensation of proprioception. Then comes the last nucleus which is called the visceral afferent nucleus. So as the name indicates, this receives information from the viscera. The pain occurring in the viscera, obviously the somatic pain is different from the visceral pain. So the pain occurring in viscera and any other sensation that comes from the viscera is received by this nucleus, which is called the visceral afferent nucleus. Now the last part of this grey matter is remaining, that is the intermediate portion. The intermediate portion has two nuclei. One nucleus is on the medial side and one nucleus is on the lateral side. As this is the intermediate zone and it has a medial nucleus and a lateral nucleus, so we will name them accordingly. Intermediate zone and a medial nucleus, so it will be called intermedio-medial nucleus. So this is the intermedio-medial nucleus which has internuncial neurons. Internuncial neurons are connector neurons which basically function to connect two tracts together. We will discuss in this nucleus when we come to the tracts. And then comes another nucleus which is lying on the lateral side in the intermediate zone, that is called the intermediolateral nucleus. And this intermediolateral nucleus is the nucleus which from where the efferent impulses, efferent autonomic fibers start. They can be sympathetic or parasympathetic. The sympathetic origin lies in the spinal cord from the level of T1 to the level L2. So all thoracic segments of the spinal cord and first two segments of lumbar spinal cord have this nucleus which gives off sympathetic efferent fibers. By fibers I mean the axons. And then this nucleus reappears at S2, 3 and 4. This sacral segments 2, 3 and 4, and from that part this intermediolateral nucleus will give off parasympathetic fibers. So the intermediolateral nucleus is basically autonomic. It can be sympathetic or parasympathetic. Sympathetic if this nucleus is found in T1 to L2, and parasympathetic if this nucleus is found at S2, 3 and 4 segments of spinal cord. So this was about the grey matter of spinal cord. In the next series of lectures we will discuss the white matter and all the tracts related to the white matter of the spinal cord.